Hey everyone, it's Nick with the Whip Shop, and this video is perhaps one of the most anticipated tutorials of all time on this channel. In this video I'm going to be showing you my current methods for making a 16-plat nylon snake whip. Now if you're brand new to this channel, this is a channel all about whips and whip making, specifically whip making, so please do hit that subscribe button if you haven't already because it really helps the channel. Also, if you like this video and you like what I do, please do consider heading over to patreon.com/nickswhipshop where you can further support my work. Now the one we're actually going to be working on today is 3 feet long, so the strand lengths are right here. So you can go ahead and copy those down to help you later on in the video. Enough variables have changed subtly, so I think it's important to let you guys know what I'm doing differently now. Alright, it's time to prepare the core for our 3-foot snake whip. Now when I first started making snake whips, I was using 550 Type 3 military grade parachute cord. That worked great. For a while I switched over to 3/8 inch sinker cord, a material that I'm currently using for bull whips. That worked great. It was a little bit faster than using 550 parachute cord, but I found that when building smaller snake whips like 3 and 4 foot whips, it was kind of unnecessary to use that sinker cord because the overall diameter of a smaller whip like this one will be 3 feet. I just found that diameter was a little bit bigger than I wanted it to be, and starting from a 550 parachute cord core just kind of shrunk down the overall diameter of the whip after it was finished. So that's why I switched back to 550 parachute cord. I will warn you that unfortunately some brands of parachute cord are not very good at accepting 4.5 millimeter BBs, the BBs that we're going to be using to add weight to the core. And to kind of bypass that scenario possibly happening to you, I would recommend that you use, for the core, 650 parachute cord. Now this is 550, and I just happened to get lucky, I guess, and pick a brand that accepts the BBs no problem. But I would recommend getting 650 parachute cord for the core of your snake whip because the diameter just a tad bit bigger, and it's going to allow these 4.5 millimeter steel BBs to slide in. Speaking of those BBs, has anything changed there? No, it has not. Now this is going to be a 3-foot snake whip, so I'm going to find one end of this big old hank here, a parachute cord. Now if you'll notice, I didn't actually cut off a piece. This is going to be a 3-foot whip, so you may have expected me to just cut off, okay, here's a 3-foot piece. The reason that I'm not doing that is because when we put the BBs into this parachute cord, what'll happen is there's going to be a little bit of overall shrinkage to the length of this piece. And that's because the BBs are pressing all around and expanding the diameter just a little bit on the walls of the parachute cord. So the overall length of this whip is going to be 3 feet long, and the core will also run the entire length of the whip, 3 feet. I like to, in my 3-foot snake whips, have the BB portion 1/3 of the overall length. Now we just discussed shrinkage, and I have discovered that for every 12 inches of BBs loaded into a piece of parachute cord of 550 or 650 diameter, you're going to lose about 3 inches. So unfortunately, if I were to tie this off with our artificial sinew as a stopper for our BBs exactly 12 inches, we would actually end up with 9 because of that shrinkage. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to measure out 12 inches and add 3 inches. So there's 1 foot, 12 inches. And to make up for our shrinkage, we're going to add 3 more inches. So when that shrinks down, it'll equal 1 foot exactly of BBs. Now what we're going to do is add yet 1 more inch to make room for some error. And this extra inch will actually be cut off in the end. It's going to be the beginnings of all the bellies, the messy parts. So this is going to be cut off. So this just gives us 1 extra inch to work with. So we have a total of 14 inches, 3 extra inches to compensate for shrinkage, and 1 extra inch at the end that will be ultimately cut off where all of the messy knots will be that we used to tie on our bellies and the overlay. So I'm going to put this in the clamp, and we're getting ready to tie our stopper with artificial sinew, and this is going to stop the BBs. I believe in the original snake whip tutorial video that I made, I tied a knot here. So this is pretty much the first section of this video that's a little different. And the reason behind it, I'm going to give reasons behind everything that I can remember, that is, that I'm doing differently in this video. The reason that I'm doing this is because it's more sleek. There isn't a big bump there, because a knot tied in 550 or 650 parachute cord is larger than the size that a BB makes underneath there. So it's more streamlined. I'm going to tie a couple little knots there. Perfect. And that is much better than tying an actual half hitch knot in the parachute cord for the core. Now we can start filling up our 1 foot section, or to be more precise, our 1 foot 1 inch section with the BBs. Now before we start putting these BBs in the core, we want to make a favorable environment for these things to go in. Now if I leave it like this, it's a little frayed and it's hard to get those BBs in. It's just going to keep on fraying. So what I like to do is just snip off the very tip of that, and I'm just going to open that up a little bit with my fingertip, just like that. It's opening up like a flower. Now I'm just going to take my lighter and just briefly melt the edges. And what that's going to do is it's going to keep the edges open like a funnel, and it's going to keep it from fraying. And it's going to, look at that, just looks like a little funnel. So we can just put that little BB right in there. Pinch it, and then pull it along with our index finger, flesh side, and then our thumbnail. And you will get the hang of this. I remember once I don't know what brand of parachute cord it was, but it was an absolute nightmare to get BBs in. And I was just so determined to finish that whip. I was adding olive oil, WD-40, and powder, and all this stuff to just try to force these BBs down. I ended up taking a crescent wrench and then, putting it to a certain size, grabbing this, wrapping it around my fingers, here's the crescent wrench, and just forcing these BBs down the length of that core. And I don't know why I was doing that, but I was. It was one of those scenarios where I just wanted to get that whip done, Long story short, I had wished I would have just ordered some 650 parachute cord and bypassed all that trouble. So you can see, though, these are going in fairly well. And I'm going to keep on going until you get about right there, about a BB or two's width, and then we're going to melt this and pinch it closed and sealed. So we've reached the end here of our BB loaded portion. See, we've got about 1 BB width left, and I'm going to take my lighter and melt the end. It's good to have a pliers on hand. Happy birthday to me. And I'm just going to pinch that. And now we have our BB core loaded in and sealed off there like a big old sausage of BBs. Now if you'll look here, not over there, I just ate dinner, over here. This is still connected to this big old hank here. So now we can take our tape measure and we're going to measure out 3 feet, 1 inch. 2 feet, there's 3 feet, 1 inch, and I'm going to cut it right there. And this just, in my opinion, makes things much more accurate. So there's our core. It's time to put this in the clamp and give it a layer of electrical tape. Now this is the only place that you will see electrical tape being used in this snake whip. And we're doing it because it keeps those BBs in a nice straight line and also seals off the BBs from any moisture. the whip might encounter. I like to start it out of the clamp. I can just get it nice and sealed. Now we can put it in the clamp here, and this will hold this for us while we wrap it. And this has nothing to do with strengthening the core whatsoever. It has nothing to do with adding any rigidity. It's simply some vinyl to seal off those BBs from the weather and to keep them in a straight line. And I'm carrying on that electrical tape about an inch past where those BBs stop. And there we go. The core is complete. Next step is to tie on our first belly, and this is going to be an 8-plat. I've grabbed 2 strands of my first belly. It doesn't matter which 2 strands I grab. And nothing has changed here. Making sure the middles, which I've indicated with knots, are behind or as close as we can get to them being in the back of the core. And we're going to take our remaining 2 strands, feed them through, and then close up that eye. Find the middles of those 2 strands. Nothing's changed here. And now we're just plating under 2, over 2, dropping strands as we go, and we'll be ending in a 4-plat. So this is just under 2, over 2, that's all it is. Now as you can see, this is still slipping around a little bit. No worries there. Once I advance this plating downward a little bit, I'm actually going to take it out of the clamp and slide everything up, and then I'll tighten everything. So in other words, right now, out of the clamp, pushing this up like that. And now I can really put this in the clamp right there and give all these a nice tug. Make sure that that's in place. Excellent. And we can continue. Under 2, over 2, both sides. Work our way down. So as you can see, I've been plating my way down the whip. I haven't dropped any strands yet, but I'm getting very close. And with the strand lengths that I'm using today, with a 3-foot snake whip, you'll see and you'll find that it'll become time to drop the first strand. It could be on the left, could be on the right. It just so happens that the way I set mine up, the left will be dropped first. Regardless of the left or the right, you'll find that you'll be dropping the first strand when you're just past where the BBs stop. If it's stopping before the BBs, I recommend using a different strand, because if the first strand is dropped before the BBs end, then 3 strands on each side, in my opinion, aren't sufficient for covering that core. As you can see, there are no spaces in the strands here, so 8-plat is more than enough to cover that BB-loaded 550 parachute cord. So the BBs end about here. We're just going to keep on plating. Now the method that I'm using for dropping strands on the bellies, you will see in about 5 seconds. So it's time to drop a strand. And this strand is the one that we will drop. And that's exactly how we're dropping it. We're just leaving it there. Because it's so short, I'm unable to grasp it with my fingertips, so I'm using a pair of pliers to pull it one last time. And now we're just pretending that it's not there. We're ignoring it now. Now on the left, we're 3 strands. We're plating under 2/1 temporarily. We're still under 2/2 on the right side. It's right now it's unbalanced. Left, we're under 2/1. And here's our next strand that we're going to be dropping fairly shortly. Almost time for it to go. And now it's time for it to go. Thank you, buddy. You served us well in helping us expand the diameter of our first belly. Time for you to be, what am I talking about? Alright guys, we're going to cut this off now. I'm going to give this one last pull with our pliers. And we're just going to let it sit there. And now we're under 2/1 on both sides, temporarily, until we drop another strand. So keep on plating until you start running short of your other strands. Now, as you can see, it's time to drop another couple of strands, and we're doing the same exact thing that we did last time. It's final resting place. This one's a little longer, so I don't think I need to use the pliers. I'm just going to give it one more tug. Our whole thing's moving out of the clamp there. Let me fix that. There we go. And now, on the left, we're under 1/1. And temporarily on the right, we're still under 2/1. There's a 5 plat for you. Oops, there we are. And coming up to our other strand we need to drop. So our other strand here has just been dropped. And we're going to finish this thing out in a 4 plat. And then we're going to taper each strand, the length of each strand that is, and bind it to the core. Alright, I've reached the end of my 4 plat here, and it is about time that we transition this thing into our core itself. So I'm just taking all those strands, giving them one last pull, and this really hasn't changed. I'm just folding them 2 strands to each side of the core. I'm taking some sinew and the key here is lightly. This is a very short whip, and there's not nearly as much energy being exerted on this portion as there would be on, say, a 6-foot bullwhip or an 8-foot bullwhip. So this part is very important that we do not wrap tightly. Just enough to hold those strands together. So I'm going to give this one wrap there, and then I'm going to start cutting these strands in a tapered fashion. So like this, 2 and 3. And as you can see, those are staggered as to encourage the taper. Light touch here. If you bind really tightly here, it's more so important on the second belly than the first belly, but this is a potential place to get a crease if you bind too tightly. And we're going to carry that binding out about 1 inch past where the last strand stops or ends. And we're going to bring it back. Same thing, light touch. Very light touch. All the way up. And back where we started. A little bit above where we started. And at this point, I'm going to set this down. And I'm going to cut this. So now we have about a foot here, 8 inches to a foot. I'm going to take another piece of the artificial sinew, and I'm going to use a little loop method that I learned from Bernie Wojcicki and his channel. So there, we're going to put that loop there. You've seen me do this in other videos on this channel. Even here, I'm not wrapping extremely tightly. Just enough to make sure that this isn't going to come out. So through that loop, grabbing this end and then pulling the loop, and that pulls that underneath the binded area that we just did. Perfect. Now what we're going to do is pull each one of these dropped strands. We're going to cut them, and we're going to melt them. About 1 millimeter in length right there. So this hasn't really changed at all. It hasn't changed. Press that into the belly. Same with this one. And all other dropped strands. Working our way up to the last 2 dropped strands. Same thing. Cut and melt. Pull, cut, and melt. Excellent. And here is the first belly of our 3-foot 16 plat snake whip. Next step is to just give this some light binding. Once again, the key is light. Light binding, 6 inches right there. That's it. The heavier the whip, the more binding that you're going to need on any given area, especially the transition, because there's more weight. There's more weight being exerted. If I pull with a force of half a pound, if I bend this with the force of half a pound, simulating the overall length of the whip, it doesn't need to be that strong here. What if I pull with 3 times that? I'm going to need more material there, more binding to make that springiness, to compensate for that extra weight. This is a 3-foot whip. There isn't a lot of pressure being exerted on the transition, or the whole whip for that matter. Therefore, I'm only giving it, on this first belly, 6 inches, 1 layer of hockey tape, and over that, 1 layer down and back of artificial sinew. A lot of people will probably be surprised by this, but it's a small, short whip. You don't really need a lot of binding. Let's grab our hockey tape. We're just going to spiral down 6 inches. Once again, I've said this so many times in previous videos. The most important thing that this tape is doing right now is it's going to provide a netting for our artificial sinew that's going to be doing the actual work as far as binding goes. Coming up on 6. There's 6 inches right there. I'm going to cut this with an additional couple of inches. And as I talked about in my creases and kinks video and about avoiding those, we're going to make sure that this last piece here is binded very loosely so that rigidity just fades out. You know, you hear a good song on the radio and it fades out. That's what's going on right here in tension form. So that is all there is to it with our hockey tape. And now we're going to start our layer of artificial sinew. And I'm going to be using not the crisscross pattern, but just a spiral. All the way down a couple of inches past the hockey tape area and back up again. Now it's going to feel weird to be using such a small amount of binding on a whip. But you have to remember that this is a snake whip. It's all one fluid whip. So there isn't a transition area. Arguably, the only reason that we're adding any stiffness at all is so we have a piece to hang on to as a handle. And so that there is a somewhat of a transition between our hand and the rest of the whip. So here's where the tape ends. Once I get about an inch past the tape, I'm going to start easing up a little bit on the tightness that I'm wrapping to eliminate the possibility of a crease. And now I'm almost letting gravity do the work. And now we're going to go back up to the top. Same thing, letting gravity do the work. Now I'm starting to tighten up a little bit. A little more. And I'm just, whatever sinew that I'm binding over on the way up, I'm matching the tension of that sinew that's directly beneath the current wrap. Up we go. Back up to the top. Until we reach where we started. I'm going to give that a couple of wraps. And the sinew is going to stick on itself. That's the beautiful thing about that sinew. Cut it. Press it in. We're going to take it out of the clamp. And this first belly of our 3-foot 16 plat snake whip is finished. We're going to give this a roll now. Alright, I'm just giving this thing a roll right now. Alright, so the first belly of our whip is complete. We've rolled it just now. We have it back in the clamp. I'm getting ready to tie on the second belly. So I'm going to take 3 of my strands. Doesn't matter which ones. And this is pretty much identical to the first belly. Nothing's changed here. We just have a few more strands this time. Now I'm going to take my remaining 2 strands. So this is going to be an 8 plat. Have our 2 remaining strands. Closing that eye. And pulling through till we find the middles of those 2 remaining strands. There's the first one that I've marked with a knot. And there is the other one. And we can begin plating. Under 3 over 2 on both sides. So this is a 10 plat. Under 3 over 3. So we are plating now. I'm going to slide this whole belly up, and now I can really tighten those strands. using some green here in the second belly. Hopefully that'll help you guys be able to see even better. And we're just plating. Same thing here. Under 3/2, 10 plat. I'm going to keep this up until I need to drop some strands, and I'll meet up with you there. Alright, we are getting ready to drop our first strand of our second belly. This guy right here. As you can see, I've actually used just about every last inch of that strand for all it's worth. And it's time to let it go. We're going to do so the same way that we did on our first belly. We're just going to let it sit there. Ignore it. That's all it's going to be used for. And now we're plating still under 3/2 temporarily on the right. Pretty soon it's going to be an even 8 plat. 4 strands on each side. And now dropping another strand, actually that same strand, on the right side. So now we are in an even 8 plat. If I played correctly, that is. Under 2/2 on both sides. And we are looking good. Gonna keep on going until we run out of the next 2 strands. So I've dropped my strands. Here are the last 2 strands that I dropped there at the end. And now what I've just done is, once again, just like the first belly, I've cut those last 4 strands in a staggered motion. And now what I'm doing is I'm just taking those last strands. I actually need to rewrap that a little bit. I let go too much. And once again, I'm just wrapping those, binding them to our core, which is that red strand. And now I have to stress that it's very, very important that here, once again, since we're very close to the end of the overall length of the whip, it's very important that we wrap lightly here. It's more important on the second belly that you wrap lightly than it is on the first. This part of the whip is really light and really susceptible to creases. Make an adjustment with the camera. Notice using those fingertips. We're just worried about getting these all together so they're not flopping around. And we're going to let the overlay do the real constricting. I'll go slightly beyond. And back up again. Back up to the top. And repeating the process from the first belly, cutting about 7 inches of artificial sinew there. Once again, forming that loop that we're going to use to pull the sinew through its own binding like this. Through there, and pulling again. Cut off the excess. At this point, we're going to repeat the steps again of giving these dropped strands one last little tug and a snip and a melt. And I'm going to do this to all of the dropped strands. Now that we've cut off and melted our remaining dropped strands into this belly, it's time to give another layer of our hockey tape. And this layer is actually going to be a little bit shorter than the first one. And all this is really doing here is just adding some rigidity to the first 4 inches of the snake whip. And I can't stress enough, binding a short whip, especially one that's 3 feet long, such as this, you don't have to bind it tightly, in my opinion, because it's already a very light whip. And doing so is going to make it unnecessarily stiff. So we're going to be using the same method. Spiral down, spiral up 1 time. And this is the part where personal preference steps in. It all depends on how stiff you want that whip to be. Where you're holding it, that is. Now I'm continuing on a few inches, 2 or 3 inches past, starting to loosen up here so I can get that tapered rigidity out of the artificial sinew, letting gravity do the work. And once again, still wrapping very loosely here, slowly adding more tension, a little more tension, and now back up to the top, up to the top. And I like to do, this is personal preference, I just like to do down and back. That's it. For a 3-foot snake whip, that's all I like to do. Give it a few really tight wraps at the top here that overlap each other. Hold everything else in place. And here you will see the beauty of artificial sinew. Because it's wax, you can just press it into each other, into itself, and that sticks. And this thing is ready for our roll. After the roll is complete, belly number 2 is all ready for the overlay. Alright, it's time to tie on our overlay for our 3-foot snake whip. I've grabbed 4 of my strands. This is going to be a 2-tone snake whip in brown and black. So here's my 4 brown strands. Nothing has changed. Tying them on just how I always do. Of course, make sure that the knots are behind so the lengths of the strands remain the same. Now I'm grabbing my remaining strands. Because I have the middles marked, I can go ahead and let go and just find the ends of the strands Gather them all together. There's our 4 strands. Open up our eye. Slide them through. Make sure they all get in there. And close up the portal. Now we're sliding, just get these a little situated here. There we are. Now we're finding the middles of the black strands, and as I just mentioned, I have them marked, the middles, with knots. There's one, so I can just pull through until those knots stop me. That's how I know I'm arriving at the middle of each strand. There's another one, here's the last one, right there. And now we can begin plaiting. 16 plait, under 4/4. Just like that. Under 4/4. And keep on plaiting under 4/4 until we run short on a strand, and I will meet up with you there, and we will drop that strand. So keep on plaiting under 4/4. Before I discontinue this video clip here, I'm going to move this up to the top and then just tighten these down one by one and resume my plaiting. So as you can see, I've worked my way down this overlay. Everything's looking good. And we've arrived at our first strand that needs to be dropped on the left here. This is our shortest strand. So I'm going to give that one more pull. And also the 2 strands below it, going to give them a little pull here. And now we can grab our strand that we're going to drop and just swing that down. Notice I'm using my thumb just to kind of hold it in place. Now I'm switching over and grasping those 2 strands and just pulling it into the middle there into its final resting place. So now on the left side we're under 4/3, and we're still under 4/4 on the right side. Just like that. New camera arrived in the mail yesterday. I'm going to be shooting with a Sony A6300 4K. So I'm excited about that. Now this is our strand that we just dropped. It's right here. What I like to do is just to confirm that is give it a very small pull, and just when I see it start to move a little bit, I'll reach over and put tension on the strand right below that dropped strand, and that just kind of keeps it from getting pulled underneath all the other strands, and I'll really give that a good pull there. Now we can actually add a little more tension to it, and that's nice and tight. Now I can go ahead and cut off the remnants of that dropped strand. I promise after this video I am throwing these scissors away. Oh my goodness. Alright. Alright, getting a lighter. Getting that lighter. Melting the end of this strand. I'm done saying singed. Singeing is not the same as melting. I've been saying singeing. Somebody pointed that out, and you guys are right. Singeing is not melting. What we're doing is melting these strands, not singeing them. We're sealing them off by melting them. So there's the first dropped strand. Still under 4/3 on the left-hand side. And here is the next strand to be dropped. So we're going to keep on plaiting until that strand comes into play. Getting a little short on me here. I've got my pliers at hand just in case I can't grab that strand and pull it enough. And we're coming up really quick on our strand. I'm going to actually just slide everything up a little bit so you can see it. There we go. So this one's next in line. Just like we did on the last drop strand, I'm going to get one more strand below it, so we have two. And there we go, we've got our strand that's ready to be dropped right here. And two below to just kind of help it stay in place. So I'm going to grab these pliers, give that strand we're about to drop a little pull, and the two strands underlying. Taking that strand, firmly pulling and pulling it underneath the two strands. Perfect. And now we're under 4/3 on both sides. 14 plat. And just like we did last time, giving that dropped strand a little tug, confirming that this is our strand, and now we're going to the right side and we're pulling tension on those two underlying strands to just kind of lock that in place. I'm going to plait a few more strands over our dropped strand before we cut it and melt it. One more. That looks great. A little too short there, but I think it won't be a problem. Melting. Pressing it into the belly below. And carry on. 14 plat. We're going to carry this on for a little bit until we run out of some more strands to drop. I'll meet you there. Dropping another strand now. Same way we did it last time. Reaching for my pair of pliers just to get a better grip on that strand. Now, if you are going to use pliers to pull your strands into place, because obviously you can see I can't get enough tension with just my fingers alone, make sure that you do not ease up on the pressure of your pliers and slip across the nylon. You will pull some of the fibers out and it'll make it look kind of bad. So just make sure that once you clamp down, do not let go. Don't let it slide around as not to damage your parachute cord. So anyways, give that a little pull. While I've got them in my hand, I'm just going to use these to give these two strands below that drop strand a little tug. Now I'm grabbing that strand just like I did last time, pulling that into place. Now we're under 3/3 on the left side, soon to be on the right side as well. Wrapping those around just to hold them in place. And Where is our drop strand? It's right here. See that? Let's give those two strands below it a nice tug. There we are. And this is actually short enough of a strand. I'm not even going to bother trimming it. I'm just going to melt it and press it into the belly. Now I can give that one more pull here. Perfect. Our strand is locked in place. Here comes our fire. A little melt, pressing it into the belly. That's not going anywhere. Here's our other strand to be dropped. So I'm just going to drop strands as I go. Guys, this is the same thing through and throughout. I'll be back with you once we're at a much lower plat number. Otherwise, I'm just repeating things. Same method every time we're dropping strands. Alright, I've dropped a couple of strands since the last time we've been recording. So we have here a very short strand on the left-hand side that we're about to drop. Gonna get one more strand over the top of it. And just repeating the process. There have been a few requests to show the process of going from an 8 plat to a 6 plat. It's a spot where a lot of people are having trouble because it is one of the easiest areas of plating to have some gaps, going from an 8 plat to a 6 plat. There's one. Keep on plating over that. Making sure that there are no gaps. Looking around the back side, and we're looking good. Continuing to plate. Now I'm going to melt this strand and press it into the belly underneath and continue my plating. Now we're in a 6 plat. On the left, it's still 4 strands on the right temporarily. And we're going to keep on plating until we are ready to drop that other strand. And with 2 strands below, we are ready to drop that strand, turning everything into a 6 plat all around. Grabbing that strand, pulling it to the center stage. Under 2 over 1, both sides. And giving it a little pull. Perfect. And now I can cut this strand, give it a melt. And need to go turn off the music in the other room so I don't get flagged by Google. I'll be back. And I'm going to keep on plating in 6-plat. And it's time to drop one of our strands, and it will become our core. I drop this black strand right here. And as you can see, unfortunately we don't have the luxury of having 2 strands underneath because we are in 6-plat. We can no longer do that. So we're going to pull that strand that we're about to drop, as well as the strand underneath it, and swing it down to the center. And that will become our new core momentarily. Right. And I'm actually going to snip this here, what used to be the core, and give it a little melt. And press that into the new core. Continue plating. 3 strands temporarily on the left, and 2 strands on the right. And now we will be dropping our final strand on the overlay of this whip. The same thing we did on the right side, we're going to do on the left. Big pull, and now we're going to swing that to the center, and then that strand will become our new core. We don't leave these 2 strands there because if we did, the diameter of the whip would be thicker towards the end than it would be up here. So we can confirm that that is the strand that we just dropped, meaning this is our core. In the old core, we're going to give a snip and a little melt. And we are nearing the end of our whip. Alright, so that's 3 feet right there in 4-plat. I have here a 4-foot piece of 550 parachute cord in tan that we're going to be using to make roughly a 2-foot fall for our whip. So I'm just doing this how I always do, threading the parachute cord inside of itself like that. Just working it through to create our fall. Here's our completed fall. We're going to open up an eye on our loop end. Nothing's changed here. And we're going to slip that over the end of our whip. And then we're just going to tighten that loop back up. Swing that around the bottom. Now we're going to tie a 4-point fall hitch. Once again, nothing here has changed. I'd like that loop to be a little bit tighter Go. So fall around the back. And we're going to take our first strand, half hitch. Through there. Tying a knot in that strand so I know I already used that one. Here goes our next strand. Tying a knot in that strand as well. 2 more to go. And finally, our last strand right here. And really pulling this one tight, because this is the strand that we're going to feed back up through our fall hitch right now. So I'm going to thread this into my lacing needle. Nice and tight. Back up through our fall hitch and underneath our fall. May need a little bit of help from a pair of pliers to pull that needle through, because it's going to be a little bit tight, and that's a good thing. And now we can go back and individually pull all of our strands, but first, let's get that fall in place. Now, one strand at a time, I'm going to use my pliers. There's our first one, next one, third one, and then our last strand. And that looks good. I'm going to trim off our excess strands. And give all the ends of our strands a little melt to seal them so they do not fray. Lastly, we're going to cut this strand and seal it off as well. Next step after we do this will be to roll this whip. But in order to get a nice perfect round roll where all of the surface area of the whip is making contact with both the floor and the roller, we're going to need to get rid of these nasty knots and bumps here. Now if you remember back a few minutes in the video, towards the beginning actually, more than a few minutes, I talked about adding that extra inch to the core just to give ourselves a place for all of these knots to accumulate so we can now cut them all off. So what I'm doing is I've got some artificial sinew here, and I'm just binding very tightly the area just in front of these knots. And this is where we're going to be cutting the end of this off. Wrapped it, binded it a lot here, pretty heavily with this artificial sinew. Now before I cut this off, I'm actually going to grab some hockey tape, and that'll just keep this from unraveling. If we just cut it here, we're going to be cutting into that single strand of artificial sinew that we used, and it might all come unraveled. So I like to just take a piece of hockey tape and wrap that nicely. I've grabbed a sharp knife. This is convenient here because we don't have to worry about running into that steel handle that you would get in a bullwhip. Maybe a few BBs, but that's not going to dull our knife. So we're going to start right here and all the way around we're going to cut. Make sure that it's nice and uniform. So there we have it. I'm going to trim things up, neaten it up a little bit. At this point I like to take my lighter and seal off that end. We've exposed the core, we've exposed the BBs inside, so we need to seal those off. Looking good. So there is the rolled overlay. We've cut this off. What an ugly mess. Throw that away. Rolling a whip just does wonders to the overall look to the whip. Cosmetically, it does wonders, and also on the interior and the construction. It just makes everything nice and smooth. The rigidity is equalized throughout the whip. So we are now ready to attach our heel knot foundation, and then we will tie the knot and this whip will be just about finished. For the heel knot foundation, I'm using 10-ounce cowhide. Now the key here is the width. If you're using this method for making whips, 22 millimeters wide is the width that you're going to want for this strip of leather. Now the length of it may vary just a little bit depending on how many wraps of artificial sinew you used here, so that could vary, but make sure 22 millimeters on the width is what I'm currently using for the heel knot foundation on the snake whips. That looks good. As you can see, if I just do it finger tight, I can't quite make the ends meet there. That's what we're looking for, these to be touching. When I grab my artificial sinew, I'll be able to apply a lot more leverage, and these ends will be touching. And that's what we want. This part has always been a little bit tricky for me. If you want to, you can use a little bit of tape to hold these ends together while you wrap. And as you can see there, they are touching. And that's just because of the sinew. It just gives us a lot more strength, if you can hold on to it, that is. The key is to keep as much tension on this as you can while you're binding. Never loosen it up like that, or else this whole thing will just expand. You always want to have tension on it while you're binding this foundation. Now pretty soon we're going to be tying a little paracord disc. We're going to be gluing that in place, and it's just a little design I like to do. I did not come up with it. I do not know which whip maker came up with that method, but I really like it, and I now use it on a lot of my whips. That looks great. Now I no longer use wire brad nails for the foundation, for those anchors to hold this foundation in place. I now use staples. Now this is only on snake whips. Snake whips are so short and light that there's not a lot of pressure being exerted, not a lot of centrifugal force pressing down or pulling on this foundation. If it was a longer, say a 12-foot whip, I'd probably decide to use the nails still, just for a little bit more purchase. But for a snake whip like this, you can easily get away. But for a snake whip like this, it's not a lot of weight, not a lot of pressure being exerted here. These little staples do just fine. And I like to do this by taking the whip out of the clamp. And this is like my little anvil, if you will. Little surface here. And just staple away. There's one. Good. 2, 3, 4. And this is where the seam is, so I like to just put 2 of them in there. We'll just make it symmetrical. Most of these went in okay, but there's a few that didn't. Just a light encouragement from the hammer. Perfect. Being the overkill person that I am, nails are just excessive, so these staples do just fine, and it takes about 1/3 of the time. So I'm going to put this back in the clamp now. Vertical like this. Don't forget your protector. Now I'm going to heat up the hot glue gun, and we're going to add a disc here, a spiral of parachute cord. Now this is something that you don't have to do. If you don't want this, then you're going to want to make the width of your strip of leather a little bit wider. How much wider? Well, 25 millimeters. So instead of 22, add 3 millimeters to the width of your strip of leather for the foundation, and that will make up for this extra little amount here that we're going to achieve by adding a spiral of parachute cord here. We're going to make our little disc here of parachute cord, starting off by grabbing a piece of ungutted parachute cord. This is actually still attached to a 1,000-foot spool, so I'm not even going to cut it until I get it the length that I want it to be. Making sure that the inner strands, get out of here, the inner strands are flush with the outer sheath of the parachute cord. Like that. And now we can light it on fire. Blow it out, needle nose pliers, just like this, and twist like that. Now we can remove the pliers. Now we've started our spiral. And now we can just roll it up like this. Like you would a snowball for making a snowman. See that? We're just coiling it up like a snake until we get the diameter that we want. Just a little bit short there, matching the diameter of our heel knot foundation. I like that. That looks perfect. Now, holding this in my right hand, or your left hand if you're left-handed, I take my glue gun and apply some nice hot glue right there on the top. Take our spiral and just press that into place. Hot glue can sometimes be a little bit messy. It's great for working with, though, that's for sure. Taking the scissors at an angle, cutting the side here of the strand, and now I'm going to light that on fire once again, or at least melt it, get it melted. With the side of the lighter, I'm pressing that and sweeping in like that. I'll give you a nice view of that. You can see that. Nice in place. Looking good. Okay, ISO. There we go. Alright, the whip is back in the clamp horizontally. And I'm just going to build this up a little bit here. This will also cover up those staples. So I'm making some nice wraps here just to build up the area a little bit next to that paracord disc that we made. Gonna grab our hockey tape. Just one layer for a little bit more thickness. That's all. Now I'm going to go over this one more time. A few wraps with our artificial sinew. And this is just providing a nice grippy surface for our parachute cord to adhere to, so it's not sliding all over the place. A long time ago when I used to, well, not that long ago, but a while back when I used to use electrical tape for the knots to cover up where the nails were. As you know, electrical tape is very slippery, especially when it's cold, so the knots would oftentimes slip right off of that foundation. So this is, listen to this sound. You can't hear it, but it's tacky. And if we grab a piece of parachute cord right now, try to drag it across there, it's very grippy. That's what we want. So we are ready to tie our 6x7 2-pass Turk's head knot. Alright, getting ready to tie our 2-pass 6x7 Turk's head knot to finish this thing off. I have here 5.5 feet of forest green parachute cord that I've threaded into my Permalock needle. I think this will be kind of a neat color to finish this whip off. So starting the knot. Make sure you guys can see. Over. Now I've tied this knot quite a few times on this channel. If I'm going a little too fast for you, please see one of the videos in the description, which are actually specialized videos for tying this knot. So I'm not going to be going super slow under this one. We're going to go over that one, over that one, under this one, over that one as well, and under this one, over that one, and also over that one, and under, over, under, over and under. Before we go into our expansion pass, we're just going to take a look at the thing, just evening out a little bit. We don't have to be too particular about it yet. Alright. let's go into our expansion pass. So we're going to follow the leader until we get to the top. Over and under, just like that strand does. Now when we get to the top, we're going over this one, over that one, and then following that strand. So it's going to look weird. See that? That's what you want. And mimicking this strand on the left, over, under. Looks good. Now we're going to split these two in the middle, pull them apart, over and under. Now a common mistake here is to pull this very tightly, and if you do that, this is going to happen and the bottom of your knot won't be exposed. So slack is a good thing. It doesn't have to be tight. What's going to cause the knot to become tight in the end is the number of strands, not necessarily how tightly you're pulling. So over this one, over that one, and then we're going to find out, see that? We want to go under that one. Same thing. I like to reach in with my needle and kind of pull that out, expose it, move them back. So we want to go over this one, to where we came up, over this one, and under this one. And our expansion pass to expand this knot from 5x4 to 6x7 is almost done. And then everything gets really easy because it's just follow the leader until we reach the end of the knot. Over, under, we're still splitting, doing the opposite of our two strands on the left and right side of us. So the two strands go underneath on the left and right side. By golly, we're going to go over. And then here we go. We can pull that out and go under that one. YouTube, let me try that again. YouTube's video speed feature would be really helpful. They didn't have this back in the day on YouTube, but now they do, so you can slow this thing down if you want. Now let's take a look at our knot. We are finished with our first pass. This is a 6x7 Turk's head knot right here. So we don't want to just go into our second pass though. We really want to dress things up a little bit. We want to neaten things up. So we're just distributing the strands evenly. Takes a while to be able to recognize where the strands need to go. It can be tricky. See that? We got crowding going on, so I'm going to push that up, push this down. It's just something that you're going to have to play with. And over time, you'll start to recognize where those strands need to go. See that there's a little bit too big of spaces here, so I'm going to push these. It's kind of like a, I don't know, not a Rubik's Cube, but one of those games where you got to slide things around and make everything even. Boy, that sounded, the way I described it just now, sounded like a very boring game. There we go. See that? That's lopsided there. I'll push these down. A great way to know where strands should go is just by looking at the top of your knot. If things are crowded, you can follow that down and kind of push those strands away from that area where they're all converging to. And that looks pretty good. I think that's a good first pass. It's not perfect by any means, but by the time we get finished with our second pass, I think everything is going to look a lot more uniform. Does the green work, guys? What do you think? I know it looks like turquoise because my exposure is a little high, but with the current lighting situation that I'm working with, it's about as good as I can do. Sony a6300 would be rocking it in this low light, that's for sure. Okay, so I'm beginning my second pass of my 6x7 Turk's head knot, and this is the easy part because we're just following the leader. The strand right here, we're doing everything that it does. It's going over, we're going to go over. It's going to go under, we're going to go under. Everything it does, we do. And it always should be on the left side of us. Always. We're just staying to the right and doing everything that it does. It is our guidance. See, don't pull like I just did. Don't pull too hard. You don't want that to happen. It's a huge misconception that, you know, you gotta pull tight, tight, tight. You don't need to do that. Especially if you're gonna be waxing your whip. That contributes greatly to the rigidity and the strands being locked into place. Sometimes it's a little tricky to get in there. Following the leader. And your strands will twist on you like this. It's okay, just make them true and guide them through, guide them in. Firm pressure, don't tug hard. I just want to pull them through firmly. Now in just a moment we're going to take a little break here and look over our knots. Look over our strands and just see how we're going. Not bad. I'm starting to cover up this disc a little more than I like, and while we still have plenty of spaces in between our strands, this is a great opportunity to move things around because they're not locked in place yet. So I like to take my thumb and just kind of push all the strands downward towards the thong of the whip to just kind of expose that little disc that we made. Why would we cover it up? We spent a decent amount of time getting that on there, so why would we cover it up? That's better. Let's continue. This whip will be waxed. You guys are going to get a sample of the new Sony A7. Oh man, I don't have the A7S. I wish I did. The new Sony a6300 that came in. Camera is unbelievable in low light. That's one of the primary reasons I got the camera. That, and it shoots in 4K, which is pretty great. This camera that you're watching this video with right now, or that's filmed what you're watching, that is a Canon T3i, and it's a great camera, don't get me wrong, but it's got a mirror in it, which means that if you're looking into the lens, my finger isn't actually pointing to the image sensor. There's a mirror, like a periscope basically. And cameras that have mirrors lose a lot of light sensitivity because a lot of the light refracts off of that mirror, reflects, and you lose the sensitivity. Now the new A7, the new A6300 that I have does not have a mirror. The light directly goes into the lens, straight into the image sensor, and that's why you can get these unbelievable experiences shooting in low light with very little noise. Well, I made a little mistake here. I cut this strand for the knot too short, and this is a perfect opportunity to show you guys what can be done if you run out. There's no way I can make this corner with this needle, so unfortunately we're gonna have to improvise a little bit. So here's another piece. Actually, this is the last piece that I have of this color green. So this is something that can be done to save the knot and save yourself from having to undo everything. I have the 2 strands cut neatly. I'm going to melt them together. Now the key here is to melt them together like this and then have them flat. Have them flat like that. See that? Now we can take our scissors and just snip the edges so that this new fused on piece will slide through the knots that we've already done. Now I'm just melting the corners so there's no sharp edges that would catch. This is not a custom order here, so before you guys get a little worried about my integrity, if this was a custom order, I would indeed retie the knot and use an appropriate length piece of parachute cord. And now we can put our needle back on and continue working. And there we go. Let's see how it slips through. Not bad. Now you guys may be wondering, what are you going to do when you get to the point where the 2 pieces are fused together? That's going to show, isn't it? Well, unfortunately, it will show unless we get it parked underneath 2 strands, and I'll show you. Hopefully we got lucky. We may need to actually take those off, or separate the 2 strands and redo that so that we get the alignment correct, so that it's resting underneath 2 strands. And it's covered up. Man, that slides through pretty well. Come on. And now we can pretty much see where this is going to rest. And unfortunately, if you look at that, it's just on the ragged edge of being exposed. So what we're going to do here is I'm going to lay this across, and I'm going to see that I'm going to be going under these 2 strands. So I'm actually going to cut this again. Not in the middle. Now when we melt this, it's going to shrink a little bit, so I'm going to give myself about 1 millimeter extra, and cut that off. And let's refuse these together. And now we know exactly where they're going to be. Pinch that, good. Same thing, we're going to do that here. We're just going to trim those corners. Do that and just make it smooth. It's a little bit complicated to do with those scissors, so I have a more appropriate tool. This is just a snippers. You can get more precise with this. And don't skip this part right here. This is going to keep it flowing smoothly through and underneath all the other knots, all the other strands. So now, here's the moment of truth. Over and under these 2 strands is where there is the final resting place for that place where the 2 strands are fused together. See that? And there she is, right there. You cannot even tell that that happened. Now we can finish the knot. These are a little crowded here. I don't really like the looks of that. That should take care of itself when we roll the knot. Pull on that strand, pull on that strand. Looks good. before we cut anything, I'm just going to separate this a little bit. You can see the definition of those two strands. Good. Now I can cut our starting strand. Make sure we made all our passes before we do that. When we're good, I cut that strand. Sorry. A little melt. Turn down our flame size here so we're not burning everything in the vicinity of the strand. And press that in. Now we're going to give this knot a roll on the floor. Be gentle when you roll your knots. You don't need to put as much pressure as you do on the bellies and the overlay of the whip. I'm just going to move things around a little bit, making sure that we're cool. Really getting in the corner there, in the crevice, so that's laying down nicely. And then I like to do a little flattening of the top of the knot. And there we go. This whip is ready to be waxed. This is what I'm still using to wax my whips. This is the Nesco Roast Master. You can see it's starting to show signs of wear. So I'm imagining sooner or later I'm going to have to get a new one, but it still gets the job done. Using paraffin wax to wax all whips, all nylon whips. So nothing's really changed there at all. So I'm waiting for this to heat up. Should take about 45 minutes, and we're going to wax the nylon whip. 217 degrees, 220. Still using this infrared laser thermometer to read the temperature of the wax. Now, as far as, I'm not going to get wax on my new camera here, but as far as temperature goes, I like to see about 200 degrees. So I've got this little little plastic scoop here. I just kind of stir up the wax and get it exposed to the air. Kind of helps it cool off quicker. Okay, I just got a reading of 203 degrees on the wax, so we're ready to put this whip in there. And I'm just going to let it sit in the wax and absorb as much as it possibly can. I think 5 minutes will be safe. Alright, the whip has stopped bubbling. 5 minutes is up, and it's time to take it out of the wax. Now, what I like to do is take 2 generous amounts of paper towel. And I'm just going to scoop this thing out of the wax. And we're just going to pat this whip down so we don't have any residual wax hanging around and causing flakage when we go to crack the whip. So I'm just working my way towards the end of the whip. Just soaking up that excess wax. First off, I'm letting a lot of the wax that's still liquid drip back in, so I'm not wasting too much. Really pay attention and squeeze the fall hitch. That'll get rid of all that extra wax. And just kind of make sure everything's looking good. And it is. There we are. Time to let this thing dry. Cool, I should say. The last step here is to tie a cracker onto the end of our fall. So I'm going to do so by taking the end of the fall and taking our awl and poking a hole through it. And plunge the awl through, opening up our eye that we're going to be sliding our cracker through. So as you can see, I've slid the twisted end of the cracker through the fall there. Now on the cracker I'm going to be opening up an eye like that. And now I'm taking the other side of the cracker and feeding that through my eye, pulling it tight. And there we are. I want to thank each and every one of you for watching this video today, and I hope that the methods used in it will help you to further the quality of your snake whips. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you on the next one. And a snip. And a melt. 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 Oh my gosh. This is just stupid. There we go. And a melt.